feel like your brain is going to explode with sleep deprivation and questions and concerns and anxiety all around parenting.
Yes, I do for sure. Hi guys, welcome to the Mindful Mommies podcast. Mindful, full as in F-U-L-L. I am Brianne Morissette.
And I am Stina Martinez.
And we are sisters-in-law, and combined we have 4 very busy boys. Hello everybody, welcome to the Mindful Mommies podcast, episode 5. We are so excited to have this next guest on our show today. We are diving in deep with parenting coach Margery Healey to talk about our children's behavior. Margery has an undergraduate degree from the University of Western Ontario, and she has participated in a year-long intensive program in affiliation with the Seattle Pacific University called the Parent Coaching Institute. Margery is also the mother to 3 boys, 2 of which are twins, and through her parenting journey, she has developed and discovered a deep compassion for every parent who is trying to develop a positive and loving relationship with their child. I was connected with Margery through a friend of mine who recommended her services to me. At the time, I was going through quite the three-nager phase with my little one, Jake, and was at a loss of what to do. Since then, Margery has been an invaluable source of support for our family. Her approach is straightforward, yet very gentle and supportive. Just what I needed for my little Jake. It's been such a pleasure working alongside with her and having her help guide us through this journey. We are so honored to have her here today.
Yes, we're so excited. Hi everyone, it's Stina. I just wanted to also welcome Margery here. We're so excited to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. So we wanted to start off by asking you a little bit about your journey and how you became a parenting coach.
Okay, well, after having 3 boys of my own and falling in love with being a parent, and also just having an innate love for human psychology, human behavior, for just understanding people. I love people and I'm curious about people and how they behave, what they do, why they do it. So those two sort of started to merge, and I think my twins were quite young. They were around 2 years of age when someone said, "You would make a great parenting coach." And I remember looking at her and saying, "I have twin 2-year-olds. When am I going to have time
to do this?
To parent coach? And what exactly is that?" So I went on to have a third, and when my youngest was 3 and the twins were 7, I started researching what it would be like to go into a graduate program that looked at both kind of psychology of human behavior and how we change, and merge that with children and how they develop and how they grow and how it can support them. And I remember getting into a minivan and driving away for a girls' weekend and looking at 4 of my best friends and saying, I am either going to design one-piece boys hockey equipment or
Brilliant.
Right? Let's not take that off the table.
I love that.
But if any of your listeners are so inspired, it's there. Or I'm going to apply to this graduate program and see if I can get in to learn more about what this parent coach journey could look like. And everyone burst out laughing. I clearly was not going to be designing sports equipment.
That's fantastic.
Wow. Yeah. So how old were your kids when you started the program?
So my youngest was 3 and the twins were 7.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Let's just say no one ate dinner that year.
Yeah.
Or not a prepared
macaroni and cheese and goldfish
meal.
crackers,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes, we lowered the bar.
Yeah, exactly.
We're all about the DoorDash.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I had never heard of I've heard of a parenting coach before, Brie, you started sort of sharing a bit about your experiences with Margery, and I knew that you were having some challenges, and as am I, and you were saying how helpful she'd been, how amazing you'd been working with her, but I was like, oh, what is a parenting coach?
Right, and I had never heard of a parenting coach until I met Margery, so I don't, maybe Margery, you could explain what a parenting coach is exactly.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's fair because I think it's something that's fairly new and it's a different field. Coaching has really only been around for the last 15 years. And then people have taken that model of how people grow and change through being coached, whether it's business coaching or life coaching. And they've sort of started to put their own specific interest into what they want to focus on. And I think for me, it was obviously my love of parenting and my love of, seeing people grow as parents through their kids. I always say our kids are raising us. We're not raising them. So I work with parents only. A lot of people ask me if I work with the children, and I do not work with the children because parents are the experts on their children. So I definitely want to reach families through parenthood and how we're guiding our kids. Anything from tantrums to homework to mealtime to sleep to sibling rivalry. Pretty much everything that shows up I will deal with and help parents work through. And my goal is really to calm the chaos, because this is supposed to be joyful. It is supposed to be a good experience. It's hard work.
And we forget about that.
Yeah.
It's like you get so caught up in it that you forget, I had these kids because we thought this was going to be like this joyful, amazing experience. Yeah. And we wanted to bring something beautiful into our life, and you get so caught up in that chaos.
Yeah.
So I love that, what you just
said. You
said.
forget it's fun. And I think part of what's happened is there's so much information. So one of my goals is to help parents weed through that information and pick what's relevant, why it's relevant. I like to go to science a lot on when I'm looking for good, solid information, like how exactly do children develop, and how can we use that knowledge to be better parents. So I help them weed through information, and I really help them connect to their confident self again, because I think when they are unsure or feeling overwhelmed, they lose their confidence.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what I have felt. It's been so nice. It's like this security blanket having you in our life, because I can kind of go, like you second guess yourself, and it's so nice to be able to check in with you and go, okay, am I doing this right? Or was I right to follow through on that? Or did I push too hard? Or so that's,
and I think
that's
so it. It's so hard that why do you want to go to bed at night and lie there laying awake wondering if you're doing it right? Am I doing this properly? Like, I don't want parents to lay in bed at night reading a parenting book, because by the time you go to bed, who wants to read a parenting book? And my part of my job is to look for that information and help you decide what would work for you if you were going to read something, and also just to lay awake at night and just have that, I don't want you laying awake at night. But I guess what I'm saying is, to when you go to bed at night, you want to feel good about how you're raising your kids and how your family life is going for you. And it should just be positive, not this negative wheel in your head saying, oh my gosh, I think I made a mistake, or I didn't handle that right, or I would like to be, better at this. I really like to weed that out.
Yeah, and it's such an emotional thing. Like, the emotions are so big, and I know, like, with my 7-year-old, we're having some struggles right now, and when we have a rough morning, like trying to get out the door, or we have a rough day, it just, everybody feels it, and everyone feels, like, if I lose my temper or get frustrated, then I feel sad, and then he feels sad, and it just affects everybody. So it can be such an emotional thing. And then you go online and start Googling things, and there's like a bazillion answers.
I do have as homework for some of my clients that they're not allowed to Google.
Nice.
Like, no Googling.
Yes. I love that.
That's smart.
Yeah, you just go on Google and it confuses you more. Or makes you think you have like an illness that you're dying from. Yeah. You can go the opposite extreme.
Yeah. Or I think it says, I think Google's full of things you should not do. If you do this, you'll ruin your children. If you do that, you'll ruin your children. If you do that. And so I look at Google and I think, wouldn't it be nice, if you just told us what we should do? Because there really isn't anything out there saying, well, what can we do? How can we do this better? How can we connect to our kids? And I think it's full of people warning you and kind of scaring you a little bit that you're doing this wrong, and it seems to be mostly negative. And I really don't want that. I want it to be a positive experience.
So I think, to bring us kind of to the topic today, which we've sort of tried to narrow down, even though it's quite broad, to behavior and is somewhat impossible, Margery has kindly put together 6 tips that you have for our listeners and followers, and maybe we could just kind of walk through and discuss each one and go from there.
Yeah, I think our focus today would be on behavior, and there's going to be topics that we hit that can be podcasts within themselves. So we'll keep it as focused but still tangible for today.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing is when we're looking at behavior in kids, whether it's like you've got a hitter, a pusher, a biter, someone who's not sleeping, someone who won't eat, someone who won't listen. I think the best kind of first tip that I'd like to offer is that you just choose one behavior at a time to deal with. Pick the one.
I love that.
Yeah.
It makes it so manageable. Like you say that and I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't have to worry about like that he's not saying like like you get so into the like, oh, he didn't say please, he didn't say thank you, oh, he hit somebody, oh, he like it's like and just to say, okay, well, right now what's the most important thing? The most important thing is this. Yeah,
and I want you to follow it, and if you looked at all of those that you just listed, you give up. And your child will be overwhelmed.
Yes.
Sometimes it's really obvious, though, because I have a very obvious problem. My 2-year-old has the endearing nickname of Baby Shark.
Oh.
Because he, for like a year now, has had a problem with biting, and it's how he communicates. And it's an ongoing issue with us. And unfortunately, it's only with the people he loves the most, like his cousins, who we live with.
Yeah, they seem to be the target.
And his brother. So for us, that's like our big glaring thing that we're constantly working on with the 2-year-old. Yeah. But then, there's tons of other things too. But there is sort of one thing that I'm like, okay, we could definitely work on that one thing, and then hopefully it would help with others too.
And what's really interesting about choosing one thing at a time is that often when you deal with that one thing, sometimes other behaviors that are on your list just naturally start to go away because they learn. Like, let's say you were setting a boundary on biting and you really worked with him to understand, when he can use his teeth and when he can't use his teeth. And we got him, really listening and understanding that and learning that behavior. Then he might just, when you say no to something else or turn to set a boundary on something else, the learning curve will either be really quick or he'll figure out he knows the new pattern and he will learn a little bit faster. So sometimes other problems just solve naturally on their own through choosing the one to focus on.
Yeah, and I've noticed that with Jake. Like when we came to you for Jake, we were going through some serious. Jake was being very physically violent with his brother, and like I'm not going to get too much into it, but he was hitting him. There was no biting, but he was hitting, and I just was like, it was so upsetting to me, and I know it's so upsetting to you too, that your kid is a biter and your kid is a hitter, because it's just not who we are. Like, we're just not physical, like mean people. We're kind people, and it's like so upsetting to see your child going through that. And anyways, I've gone off topic a bit, but what I was trying to say was that I noticed that with Jake, that when we focused on getting the hitting under control, he just kind of like started to become more well-rounded, and like you're right, the other stuff just kind of to fall away. Right. And it was amazing. And now, he doesn't hit. Right. Every now and then he might do like a push. But it's amazing, like what the turnaround that we've had with him. Yeah, and he probably learned through, your gentle guidance on reminding him that we're going to use our hands in a different way. He also probably learned better skills in listening. Right. Just through that alone, so that now when you communicate with him on something else, he'll hear you sooner than he would have before. Right. And he learned that he developed that skill, or that skill strengthened while you were teaching him to no longer hit his brother.
Okay, so tip number 1, choose one behavior to work on at a time. I like it. Tip number 2.
Okay, tip number 2. I always say quick research pays off. So before you start to dive into whatever behavior you want to look at, I think it's important to think about, who you are as a parent and where your strengths lie, because chances are you've probably had to look at some behavior already, and maybe you did it really well because you were good at being concise or clear, or maybe you were really good at it because or made sure you communicated well with your child. Like, there's something positive about your parenting that exists. Like, we're not doing everything wrong. You're doing something right. Yeah. And what is it that you're doing right and why? And if we take that time to ask ourselves a few of those questions, it might help as you're going to apply it to the behavior you're going to work on. Okay. And in turn, you might want to ask that about your child. What is my kid good at? What are their strengths? And how can I use their strengths to help teach them the behavior I want to teach them? So just take that time to just ask yourself some questions, because in asking yourself these questions, you'll probably find out some answers that you didn't know were there. And that's a lot of what I do as a coach. Sometimes people are like, what do you do? And my biggest thing is just curious inquiry. I'm curious to know what your child's good at. I'm curious to know what you think you're good at and why. And then can we use those things and apply it to how you're going to approach this behavior problem?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Great.
Makes sense?
Cool. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tip number 3, are you guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
Tip number 3 is like subsection A, B, C, D, E, and F.
Okay.
Do it. Tip number 3 is where we get down to like the really, tangible things I want you guys to start thinking about when you're approaching behavior. Okay, so A is management. And I always say management's a really good one because it keeps us accountable as parents. But sometimes it's as simple as, can we change something in our home and the way we're set up to manage the behavior we're seeing? So my kids getting the Lysol spray and spraying down my dining room chairs, or my son sneaking the iPad and going up to his room, or my child slamming this door over and over. And so I sometimes like to say, like, okay, can we lock up the Lysol spray? Even though we're really good at baby proofing when our kids are little, as they grow up, sometimes we forget about baby proofing as they get a little bit older. So sometimes we do leave things accessible, and how can we be accountable to that? Can we put that away? Why is the iPad out where they can reach it? As parents, can we manage the iPad a little bit better, and can we lock it away and only bring it out when we want them to have it?
Can I give an example of how you helped me with that?
Yes.
I'll never forget the day. So I must have called you. I called you after, and I think I was like, I just have to tell you what happened. I had picked the boys up from a class somewhere, and they have a little restaurant. And my oldest was insisting on getting a smoothie. Right. And so we were lined up, we were in the lineup, and I said, okay, you know what? You've done a good job today. Let's go get you a smoothie. And in the lineup, they had this little drink area, and there was a container of lemons sitting there. And he wanted to touch the lemons and pick the lemons up and put them in his mouth. And I said, don't touch the lemons. We don't want you to get germs on them. They're not for you to touch. And I had to tell him over and over again. And I finally said to him, if you touch them again, you're not getting your smoothie, and we're going home. And sure enough, he touched the lemons. And I had these 2 smoothies in my hands, and I said, that's it, we're going home. And I walked by a garbage can, and I dumped them in the garbage can, and I carried him out kicking and screaming and flailing, and I'm sure people thought I was abducting him. And he screamed the entire way home, and eventually got tired and fell asleep. And I remember calling you and saying, that was the first time I actually had to really follow through. And I remember my mom always saying, make sure you follow through. Make sure, if you say you're going to do something, you need to leave. If your kids are misbehaving, you need to leave the restaurant. And so that's what I did. And I got on the phone with you, and I said, and I said, so was I supposed to do that? Was that the right thing to do? And you said, you know what, good for you for following through. You did what you said you were going to do, and that's not easy. But was it fun to have to throw away those 2 smoothies? And was it fun to have to take him out of there kicking and screaming and making it look like you were abducting this child? And I said, no, it sucked. It was awful. And you were like, well, what if you just removed the lemons? And you could have solved all of that. And you were like, what if you just picked up the little container of lemons and handed them to the lady and said, do you mind just taking these right now?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, yeah, I could have done that, I guess. I probably should have done that Instead, I threw away 2 smoothies and took my kid kicking and screaming home. Anyways, that's just a perfect example of what you said.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just management.
And it's like preventing the meltdown, right?
Yeah.
How can you, what's the step you can take before the meltdown occurs?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it came to me because I really remember this one woman saying he keeps slamming my French door over and over, and one day the door just came off the hinges and there's no door. And because she took it off. And
wow.
No, he didn't. The child didn't do it. She took it off.
She just took it off,
And then there was no door to slam.
Right.
Sometimes when we remove the problem, then there's no problem.
Yeah.
You know, of course the lemons are exciting. It's exciting to, it's exciting to slam a door. It makes a big noise.
And that's not, as a parent, that's not going through your head. What's going through your head is he's misbehaving. I've told him not to do this. Right. And now he's not listening to me, and you're so frustrated and angry with them. But really, it's kind of like, well, of course, I mean, I remember with the garbage can the other day, you said the same thing. Remove the garbage can. He wanted to play the drums on it. Mm-hmm. Well, of course he wants to play the drums on it. It's fun to play the drums. Like, you forget that they're these little beings just learning and discovering and...
That's exactly it. They're just exploring. And that leads to the second subsection of like finding a strategy, which is, can you indulge the behavior? Mm-hmm. Like, could he play the drums on something a little bit quieter? Could we give him a spoon to hit a pillow that's not as loud? Or is he allowed to hold a lemon? Oh, I see you're interested in lemons. And we can ask the lady behind the counter, do you mind if he has 1 lemon?
Right.
So while we wait for our smoothie, and then he can explore the lemon, and he might taste it and find out he doesn't like lemon. I don't know, but do you know what I mean? He gets
it's like you get, like for me, I think I get into this parenting, like the shoulds. Like he should be listening to me. It's like, I'm going to win this one. You are not going to win this. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I think that's what happens to me is it's like, if I let him win, I fail. Mm-hmm. So then I get into the battle.
Mm-hmm. So would it be interesting to look at it when they're doing something through the eyes of the child? Like, just like what you said, are they just exploring? Are they just curious? And is there something here that I can help them explore in a way that still makes sense for me and for them?
Right.
It's interesting because this is making me think about some experiences I've had with teaching. And when I've had students and I'm struggling with behavior and classroom management. And right away when you said drumming the garbage can, it brought me back to this really challenging class that I taught like 10 years ago. I think they were grade 5s. And they loved making beats. And they would come back from music class, and I think we had like math or something after music, and they would be like drumming with pencils on the desk and not listening to me, and it was driving me crazy. And then one day I came across watching like a stomp video. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to embrace this, and I'm going to let them create, like, I'm going to teach them about stomp. And do you know what stomp is?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to teach them about stomp.
Brilliant.
And I'm going to, like, somehow, and I tried to, like, integrate it into our math lesson about beats and repetition and patterns. And so we created this entire stomp performance using only materials found in our classroom. And we performed it at the assembly, and they loved it. Like, they were just absolutely loving it, because I was like, let's just, instead of getting mad at them constantly over and over and over about making these beats during my math lesson, let's just embrace it. And when they come back from music, we're going to go right into our own like mathematical music unit.
Right.
And then they get it out of their system.
Absolutely. Because you've indulged the behavior that they're very curious to learn about. Mm-hmm. So you look at it through their eyes, and how can we give them what they need and yet still learn math and be excited. And, you know, all of a sudden you have a classroom of engaged children, or you have a toddler in your kitchen who's excited. And nobody has to be upset or be mad or look at it as, well, he's not listening. Yeah. It's, well, he's curious about something. How can we help him explore that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which in turn creates harmony and peace and...
Right. And joyful parenting.
Yes. Joyful teaching.
Yes. Joyful teaching.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so that leads to kind of the next one, which is assessing the overall picture. And I think this is something we talked about in coaching at one point. Sometimes our children are doing something or exhibiting a behavior, and it's really good to look at if there's a pattern behind it. You know, are they only doing it right before bedtime when they're absolutely exhausted? Or are they only doing it in a large, very busy environment where they might be overstimulated? Or do they only exhibit behavior right before mealtime where they could be starving? You know, is there something we're missing? Because sometimes children exhibit behaviors and there's an underlying need, and I like to look at the whole picture so I don't miss what that need is.
Yes.
You know, are they trying to tell me something through their behavior? And if I look at the patterns for when the behavior is exhibited, I can look and see if they're trying to say something. We take their communication for granted, and we only look at behavior as something there to irritate us versus something there to tell us something.
That's a light bulb moment right there. Yeah.
I think it came up for you when you went away for the weekend, and was it Jake who wanted to go back to the main cabin and not stay with the big
Do you remember?
group?
Yeah, he kept running back to the cabin up the stairs. We were all on the beach, and he just kept wanting to go. Like, he would just make his way, and we'd all be down there having a great time, and where's Jake going? He's heading back up the stairs, and now one of us has to run after him and carry him down the stairs, and we talked about that, and I said I was so frustrated, and I was like, oh, here he goes again. And it's always like this is the thing, I can go into this space of, oh, it's just always him causing the problems, it's awful to have to think that, but sometimes you can get in that headspace, and then you just said, well, maybe it was just too much. Maybe there was just too much going on, and he needed that time away.
Do you know what's so interesting about it is that we look at it as he's not listening to me. He's running away, and he's not staying, and he's not listening, and it's really irritating me, and I feel really angry as a parent because my child's not listening. And when I hear that, my heart breaks a little bit because we're also not listening to him.
Right.
He's trying to say something, and we're not hearing.
Yeah.
He's just not saying it in the way that our adult brains would communicate. So I think it's important to look at that overall picture.
Absolutely.
My 7-year-old, he is going through a lot of changes right now in his life, one of them having another baby brother.
Absolutely.
But he's been exhibiting like a lot of wanting to sort of control what's going on around him, and that's coming out in really frustrating negative ways that are difficult for me because I feel like he's arguing me on everything and fighting me on everything. But when I think of it that way, it's him trying to have control over something because there's so many things happening in his life that are not in his control right now.
And when you think about it, he probably doesn't know how to say, Mom, you're pregnant, you're about to have another baby, and this feels overwhelming for me, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, and I already have one little brother. What's it going to look like when I have 2 little brothers? And he might want to say all of those things to you, but doesn't know how.
Yeah.
So it comes out in behavior.
Yeah.
And really, he's just trying to express a need. So I do think it's important we step back and say, you know, is there a pattern to the behavior? Is there something they're trying to tell us?
And there always is. There always
there
is.
Often is.
Kids don't want to misbehave. They don't want to be considered bad kids, or kids want to be good kids. They want people to be happy with them, you
Absolutely.
know. And
yeah, they do.
There's always a reason.
I know, there's always something going on.
But it's amazing how, like we said in our post today, it's like we work with kids. I know this because I work with children that have learning issues, and behavior comes up all the time, and I know how to handle it from kind of an educator's point of view, and creating a safe place for them. But it's so much more, it's so different when it's your own children. It's so different.
It's so different. And we'll talk about that as we go through. I'll bring that up because that's a really, really good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other one is natural consequences whenever and wherever possible, because there's nothing like teaching. The goal is to teach them. So if we're trying to teach them a new behavior and we can give them something that is directly linked to the behavior, then the learning process will be much easier for them, because they'll have a much more likelihood of understanding what we're trying to teach. So an example is I hear this often: my child's throwing their food, and it's like, well, okay, what if we took the food away? And I know that sounds like a management issue, but it's clearly, if they're throwing their food, they're not hungry anymore.
Yeah.
And so if we just took the food away, then they're no longer throwing their food, and they also learn very quickly and easily, when I throw my food goes away.
Right.
So you almost don't even have to say very much, which is kind of nice as a mom or a dad, because we're always talking to our kids, don't do this, don't do that, go over here, be there, it's time to go to sleep, it's time to do this. We actually don't need to say very much when we use a natural consequence. If a child throws a giant truck in the house and we just then take the truck away, then they know, oh yeah, that's not something I need to do. And then we can give them...
It's such common sense.
It really is. It really is.
Moment. But in the moment, you're like, I need to be teaching them a lesson that they shouldn't be throwing toys in the house, or you just get so in your head about it. Like, there's a lesson here I need to be teaching,
Well, this kind of falls into the next tip, which is there's no need to punish. A lot of people say, well, they were throwing food, so I took away 3 of their bedtime stories. And I'm like, ooh, why? Why did we take away their bedtime stories? It has nothing to do with throwing the food.
Yeah.
And B, we already learned the lesson. There's nothing else to be said. If we just take away the food, or we take away the toy they were throwing, then there's no need to do any further learning or teaching. It's and also the chances of a young child connecting I threw my
far
food
away,
to my bedtime story is really far away. And probably by the time they get to bedtime and you've taken away the story, they're thinking, why'd you take that away? And they feel hurt.
Sad.
And sad. Yeah. And I understand we're trying to motivate behavior, and that is an entirely different podcast. But I guess I could say now that it's not typically an effective way of motivating our children's behavior, because they're not thinking, oh, I lost my stories for throwing my food. They're probably thinking, I lost my stories and I just feel sad and mad.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it there, but it's food for thought to start with. Pardon the pun, we're speaking of food. Okay, so I think that this is something we talk about a lot, which is once we've kind of done our homework and we've decided how we want to deal with a behavior, and we've thought about it, and we've put in a really great plan of how we're going to deal with something, it's really important that we stick to a plan and give it some time to unfold, versus I tried this once and it didn't work, so I'm giving up.
Right.
And sometimes when I work with a parent, I'll say, I don't really want to talk to you next week. I'd like to talk to you in 2 weeks, because I really want you to give this plan 2 weeks. I want you to stick to it, and I want to invite you to be clear. I want to invite you to be concise, and I want to invite you to be consistent while you do it. And then we can really see, does this plan have traction? Are we getting the goal? Are we teaching them what we want to teach them? Is it working? And we can't decide that in 1 or 2 days. We need a little bit of time, especially depending on what the behavior is. Like when you brought up biting, that's also could become a very big habit. So sometimes behavior turns habitual, and we need to give it time to break the habit as well as teach. Okay. So I like to give people a length of time to work with before they throw in the towel. And if we're only dealing with one behavior at a time, hopefully we can stick to it and follow through and see if it's working. Okay. Does that make sense? I know there's so much that we could be here forever.
Yes.
My last one would be, feel free to combine these strategies. We can combine management with some redirection, with some indulgent, how can we indulge? Like, can we let them explore here? If they want to throw things and we see that they love throwing, can we give them something to throw? Can we be creative and help them find something while also saying, like, there's a boundary behind what you can throw, but, we can throw softballs. Or we can throw socks into the laundry machine. We can be creative with our kids and combine managing with indulging, with a boundary, with teaching. So my invitation is to play with the strategies when you're coming up with a plan, and you can mix and match and find something that can really work for you.
Great.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay, those are all fantastic. I want to go back a bit to the part where we were talking about how sometimes it's so much easier being an educator, why it's so much easier for me to implement these strategies with my students, but it's so much harder with my own children.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, I can totally see why. And I think that's a lie. I always say teachers fall the hardest. And they say, like, I was such a great teacher. I was such a great educator. I thought I was going to be this amazing parent. And I thought I was going to be perfect at this. And we often talk about a couple things that, you know, when you're a teacher and educator who doesn't have children, you do get to leave at the end of the day. And you can go home and make dinner by yourself, or go for a workout, or you can, you know, get a full night's sleep. So
until you have your own kids.
Right.
Yeah.
And once you have your own kids, then there's that element as well. Right.
Yeah.
So there's that alone right there. But I think part of it is, as parents, we're emotionally way more involved with our own kids than we ever would be with our students. We can keep a little bit more distance between our emotional connection to our students than we have with our own kids. And it's because our kids trigger fears in us. So if you've got a hitter or a biter, you start thinking, sort of like what you had said earlier, well, we're not aggressive people. Why do I have this aggressive child? And you look at the behavior through that lens and you become fearful. Or is this normal? I hear this all the time. My kid's doing that. Is that normal?
Yes.
And often it is. And I always say, you know, let's use the word age appropriate instead of normal. But
Right.
if a behavior is something that you're not sure falls within age appropriate, you can always check in with your healthcare provider, you know, or call your parent coach, or find a way to, you know, that's one, because I don't want you to be afraid of the behavior, and I don't want you to see the behavior as something that has a lifelong meaning attached to it. And then if we can just if we can take those things away and we can just look at only what our child is doing, it's much easier to deal with it. But when we add that layer of I'm afraid this means this, or I'm afraid I won't be able to stop it, or I'm afraid my child's going to hurt somebody else and someone's going to look badly upon my child or myself, or this is the hardest one, we actually blame our parenting. We think we're bad parents because our child's doing something that we don't want them to do.
All the time I think about, oh my gosh, am I messing up my kid? Am I doing something wrong? Oh no. Yeah.
And I always say that, well, the people who are listening to this podcast, or someone who calls me, is the least likely person to be messing up their children. They care way too much. They would never be messing up their child. But it is good to learn why we are getting emotionally entangled.
Yes.
And what we're afraid of. And sometimes that emotional entanglement leads back to our own childhood experiences, how we were raised, and what we took away from that. And we become afraid that our child might become something, and we try to stop it, and then we get very emotionally involved. And I really invite parents to separate that from what they're just seeing. Because as we discussed before, they could be hitting because they don't know how to tell you they're feeling something, and it actually has nothing to do with aggression.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's all fantastic. Should we go into a little bit, should we now ask some of the questions that the followers and listeners have put out there?
Yeah.
So we asked her, we reached out to our community, and we sort of asked some of the moms and parents and dads, and if they had any questions for you.
Yes.
And we have got some great answers, or we got some great questions. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems to be that the majority of the listeners have toddlers. So we're all kind of going through
the same thing.
We're going through the same thing. So the first one was timeouts. Do you agree? Do you not agree? And if you do agree, how do you go about it?
Okay. So I think timeouts just got a really bad rap on how they were being implemented. And maybe it was Super Nanny, the way she was doing it when that show was on years ago.
Oh, yes.
I totally used to watch that show.
Yeah, and I think she sort of implemented in a way that was shameful for the child and wasn't able to do a few key things. So first of all, I do agree with a timeout. I think there's nothing wrong with a timeout in the light of the child, or sometimes even the parent, needs a break from the situation. And I think it's really important to recognize why we're doing a timeout. Sometimes we need to remove ourselves from a situation, calm down, regroup, and then come back in. And when it's done in that light, timeouts can make a lot of sense.
This was like life-changing for our family. Instead of when you shed a totally different light on the whole timeout thing, because for me, timeout was like putting them in a corner and forcing them to stay there and thinking that's kind of how timeouts work. But your strategy was, in our instance, it's different in everybody's home, but we're able to just put him behind on the stairs where he can still see us.
Yeah.
And so it was like, you need some time away right now. You're not able to behave right now in this situation, so let's have some time away.
Right.
And then the other thing that was life-changing was, instead of like, if you're at a restaurant, this was huge, and I'll just be fast, I always thought, okay, they're misbehaving, I need to go home, like that's it, I just have to go home, or I can just never go to a restaurant. And you were like, well, that kind of sucks for you guys, like, you don't you want to be able to go to a restaurant? And you said, take them outside and say, when you're ready to behave, we can go back in. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about that. Right?
Yeah, that we could take a break. Then maybe the situation feels overwhelming. And we
Mm-hmm.
just need to calm down for a few minutes outside of our environment and then try again. It also separates, it's not the child that we're mad at. When we stick a child in the corner and say, well, now you're in timeout, or you're on a naughty stool.
Oh, yeah.
Or, it really can become shameful, where it's like, no, it's not the child that I'm upset with. It's the behavior that I'm trying to teach. So when we take them out of a restaurant, we're just regrouping. We're saying, okay, we don't like this behavior that we're seeing.
Something's going on here.
Yeah. We just need to stop and let's all calm. And then let's come back in. And I think that this is where the other piece that we talked about a lot was, I'm going to re-invite you to try again.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So that's become really big in our family. And Jake will say, okay, I'm ready to try again. I'm ready to try again. And that's, you introduce that.
Yeah.
You introduce that to us.
Yeah.
When you're ready to try again, let me know.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you guys can assess that as parents too. Remember that you guys get to assess when you see them ready, because sometimes they'll want to try again so soon and they'll be like, I'm ready to try again, and you could see that they might not be quite ready.
Yeah.
And the reason I love this concept of the re-invitation is because it sends this beautiful message that we're going to support you. We're going to support you to come back into this space and learn the skills we're trying to teach you. Now, it could be a while. As I said, I don't like to try something for 2 days and give up. I like to give teaching skills. Sometimes they're lifelong. We're not going to teach them something like a value lesson could be a whole 3, 4, 5, 6 years, but learning to keep your hands to yourself, we're going to give that a couple of weeks to a month, or maybe longer, depending on the age of the child, because we still have a lot of impulse behavior where they feel something and they'll just hit based on that impulse. So we want to give them time, and during that time we want to send that underlying message that we believe in you. We know you can accomplish what we're trying to teach you, and we're going to give it the time it needs, and we're going to support you. But I have to give this timeout one caveat.
Okay.
If you are in a restaurant or at home and you're on your 5th time out, there's something else going on. It's not just, I need a break from the room. So I like to give timeouts, a couple, 2 or 3. Okay, remember, we're learning, and we don't expect it on the first try. But if you're in a restaurant and you're out there for like the 5th, 6th, 7th time, the restaurant might be too overwhelming.
So then you would go home.
You need to redirect. Or if you're at home and the siblings are together, let's say, and they cannot get along, maybe it's too overwhelming, they've spent too much time together, and they just need a break from having to manage a sibling relationship. And they can't help from hitting or biting because they've just been in the space together for too much time. So if you find yourself on repeated timeouts, I want you to step back and go back to some of those strategies we talked about earlier in the podcast and say, okay, is there something else going on? Is there an overall picture? And that's with anything. You're doing anything that's on repeat. We want to take a look and say, are we missing something that's going on that's deeper?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, see, I was going to say, I love what you said about how it's you have to separate the behavior from the child.
Absolutely.
And how, it's
so
two separate pieces. And I think it was my mom who always said there are no bad children. There is bad behavior, but there are no bad children. And that's something that I've carried on into my teaching with the students that I teach and with my own children. And I say it all the time when I'm struggling with behaviors, especially my 7-year-old now, he can vocalize it and he can say oh, Mom, I feel like I'm being a bad kid after he's had time to calm down. I'm like, no, there are no bad children. There are bad behaviors, but there are no bad children.
And that's why I work with the parents, because your children are perfect.
Yeah.
Your children are beautiful little beings who are learning. And we need to be that support for them. And even bad behavior sometimes is an interesting way to look at it. Sometimes it's just their way of communicating.
Yeah. They're trying to tell you something.
They're trying to tell you something.
That's a really good way to think about it.
Yeah.
I have a question, actually, when I was chatting with a bunch of my girlfriends about your strategy with the timeouts. They came back with, that's awesome, but what if I don't have a gate? What do I do? Where do I put my child? And how do I ensure that they stay where they're supposed to stay? Am I supposed to sit with them and stay? What would you recommend for that?
Yeah. And one thing that's really important is to communicate that when we're trying to teach them that where we're putting them isn't because it's a bad place. We actually want them to go and calm down. And so sometimes I invite parents to get creative and create a calm down space for their child ahead of time, where they have a beanbag chair or a blanket or a stuffy or, some quiet books. And they associate that when things get overwhelming, that we could take them to their calm down space. Now, if you have a really spirited child, they might not stay. That sounds very airy-fairy.
That would be my child. No, he wouldn't stay.
Yeah, he might not stay. So if you have a child like that, sometimes I'll invite parents to take them to their room and stay with them.
There's our kids.
Yeah, I love the idea of a calming space for your child. Again, we have a calming room at school, and it's something we use all the time, and kids can make the choice to go there if they need to calm down, or sometimes we give it as one of the choices for them. I never even thought about having a calming space. I mean, we have their room, or we have a chair where they go and sit. We don't have a gate, but we have a chair where my 2-year-old will sit when he needs to have his time out. But I love the idea of making it sort of more of a nice calming space.
So sorry, quickly, if you were to have a child that would leave the calming space, do you stay with them in that calming space and just be there with them?
Yeah, it might depend on what they leave to go and do. If they leave and they're not ready and they come back and they're re-engaging the behavior we're trying to teach them, we might want to look at what do they need, and are we providing that need? And if the calming space isn't working, can we do something different for them? So if they're, it might depend on what they go and do, but if they go and take off and go up to their room and start playing with Lego quietly on their own, well, then that solves your problem too, and that's okay.
Yeah. And they're self-regulating.
They're self-regulating on their own. What you do find with kids who can connect to that quiet space is they'll eventually just start taking themselves. They'll feel the feeling, especially if we help them understand why we're taking them there or why we're providing that option. It looks like you're feeling overwhelmed. It looks like this is too much for you. Okay, so one last question. I know that biting and hitting is a really, really big we have a visitor, is a really big topic, and we're hoping to have you back again to go delve deeper into some of these topics. But do you have any quick tips for biting and hitting? Biting
in particular
for you. Biting is so hard because I think there's a lot of shame just from other parents too, if you're the mother of a biter, and a lot of other people aren't understanding of that. But I think it's good to mention that biting, hitting, and pushing and grabbing and pulling, they're all impulsive behaviors, and they're all equal. They're the same. Their child's trying to express something and they don't know how, so they're just using a behavior to let you know. And hopefully no one's going to be eaten in the process, but hopefully So a little bit of redirection. So sometimes I offer to say to parents, like, is there a pillow that they can bite? Is there a teether that you can attach to their clothes that when they feel like biting, we can offer them that instead? It looks like you might need to bite something. While we can't bite each other, we could bite this. This is so when you feel those feelings of frustration, this is allowed. This is something we can do. And if we need to take a break from the room, if you are in a social setting and your child's biting, multiple people in the social setting, and you remove them, that it's a sign that they can't handle that impulse, that the setting is too much for them. And that's fair. If you put them in like a toddler classroom and they're biting everyone, they are trying to tell you, this is too much for me. So taking them out of that space is fair. It's just not a punishment. It's just recognizing that they need a break.
Yeah.
And so I really invite some redirection and some recognition of what they can handle. And I really invite other moms listening to this to be kind and loving and compassionate to those mothers who have biters. It's nothing we are doing.
Yes.
It's nothing we are doing. And hopefully everyone has their tetanus shot.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
I'm just teasing.
Yeah. Thank you. That's wonderful.
That's very helpful. Well, that wraps up our questions. Can we play a quick game with you to finish off our podcast here?
We sure can.
Okay, this is you're only allowed to say yes or no to these questions. I'm just gonna fire off one word or maybe a couple and see what you have to say. All right. Do you believe in the iPad?
Yes.
Okay. Co-sleeping?
Yes.
Timeouts?
Yes. In the light I described. I know I broke the rules.
I know it's hard, right?
I told Bria, I don't think I could do this.
I know. Rewards?
No.
Oh, interesting. That's a whole new podcast. Chores?
Yes.
Okay. Wine?
Absolutely.
Vacations without kids?
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, that wraps up our podcast. Thank you so much, Margery, for coming here. And we hope you had a good time, and we'll come back again.
I will come back anytime. Thank you for having me. It was awesome.
Yay. We did it. We made it with kids. I've got a kid in my arm right now, by the way, feeding it a bottle. Oh, were you going to say something?
Say bye, everybody.
Say bye-bye. Can you say bye?
Bye. Thanks for listening.
What a pleasure it was to have Margery on our show today. She is so passionate and knowledgeable. We could have talked to her for hours and hours. We hope that she'll be back. Well, actually, we know she'll be back because we've already talked about future topics. If you want to find out more information about Margery or contact her for any of her services, you can find her at thecompassionateparentcoach.com. She's also on Instagram at thecompassionateparentcoach. If you also want to review any of her tips, you can find them on our blog at themindfulmummies.wordpress.com. We'll also make sure we have a link in our bio on our Instagram page. Thank you so much for joining us today. We sincerely hope that you're finding this helpful and you're liking our podcast. If you haven't yet, please make sure you subscribe to the Mindful Mummies podcast so that you know when a new episode has been added and you don't miss out. We have lots of good stuff on the way. Until next time, guys.